Welcome to the exploration of consciousness.
And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the exploration of consciousness. This is the 30th podcast, and I'm happy to introduce my guest, Courtney Turner. Courtney Turner is the host of the Courtney Turner Podcast and What is the Movement, and her new show coming soon, The Right Voices. She is also a speaker and aerial acrobatic performer. We're going to check out a video of her in performance, by the way. I get to see her perform at CauseFest in Franklin, Tennessee back in June of 23, and it was really cool. She spent her academic career largely seeped in the world of philosophical and psychological texts, and being a passionate athlete and performing artist paved the way for the world in which she is currently immersed. Many today know her as the host of the Courtney Turner Podcast, where she boldly seeks truth, diving into a myriad of deep topics surrounding issues of health, fitness, medicine, philosophy, psychology, politics, geopolitics, and sociocultural zeitgeists. However, she was born with a rare set of circumstances that has greatly impacted her perspective on life. And we're going to just jump right into that because that is a really interesting thing. You were born with congenital rubella. And I'll just let her explain that. But Courtney, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining me. Spur of the moment.
Thanks for having me.
Yep.
Yeah, so congenital rubella. So the way the story goes, and those who have followed my work, I've kind of gone on the journey of exploring the whole contagion narrative. So we'll just frame it as this is the story that I, was told my whole life. So my mom was sick during first trimester of pregnancy. She never actually had many symptoms. My father was very sick. Her doctor was actually very good friends with my father, and the wife of the doctor had been traveling and supposedly had contracted German measles. And then my father was sick for like a week, had a really high fever, was delirious. And then my mom, about 2 days later, he didn't want to go to the doctor. He wasn't, diagnosed with anything, but he was very, very sick. And then about 10 days later, my mom developed this rash on her upper chest, and she started doing all sorts of research because she knew she was pregnant. She was pregnant with me. And so she was concerned, and she decided that she thought she had contracted German measles. And they did what is called a test of the titer. They tested the titer and they determined that it was at 112, meaning that I was not impacted, that there was nothing with me, or whatever might have been going on with my mom, that I was okay. I was born on Super Bowl Sunday in the middle of blizzard, and I was not arriving conveniently for my dad to watch the game. He was a huge Super Bowl football fan. He wanted to watch the game, but he didn't just want to watch the game. He wanted his friend, the doctor, to watch the game with him. So they tried to induce labor, but I had already started to crown when they gave my mom the epidural. So she was tied up with a spinal headache for the first 2 weeks of my life, couldn't hold me, lift me, any of that. But when she did, she noticed that there was something wrong with my eye, and that one eye was rolling up in the top of my head, not focusing. And she kept asking them to do all these tests, and they did. They test the torch, which the R stands for rubella. It's Tay-Sachs. I don't remember what all of them are, but the R is for rubella. And they did a bunch of other tests, and they kept saying everything's fine, normal. They were really covering up. Something was clearly going on. They kept telling her that baby's eyes don't focus, and she said, "But one eye is focusing, so clearly something's going on." My maternal grandfather had cataracts. And so my mom thought that it looked a lot like what was going on with him. And so she brought me around to several doctors, and they corroborated that. In fact, I was born with a cataract. And back then, cataract surgery was very different than it is today. It's pretty routine. A lot of people are in and out really fine within 24 hours. That was not the case. They had done the procedure, but they pulled the iris and they left the and the retina to go back a few months later. So I was 3 months old and they did this cataract removal, and they went back and they did what's called a retinal cleanup. And during this process, they determined that I had pigmentation behind my sighted eye. So I'm blind in one eye. And they said that they thought that I was born with congenital rubella. So at that time, they told my mom that the prognosis was very, very dismal. They didn't think that there was any hope for me. They thought I'd be completely blind, deaf, retarded, and autistic, and that the best she could hope was to find a nice institution for me to spend my life. The next thing they discovered was that I needed heart surgery when I was about a year old. And then from there, I learned how to speak by reading lips. So we didn't know, but I'm significantly hearing impaired, and I got hearing aids when I was about 6 years old. And on top of that, I was born with hypotonic limbs, stunted growth, fine and graphic motor impairment. So there's several challenges and complications. And my parents actually sued when I was born because the premise was that the doctor was dyslexic. He read the titer as being 112 when they believed that it should have been 121. And they said the alternative would have been to abort me. So if they had known that it was 121, that would have been the path. So they had, and the lawyer was like the same lawyer as the Larry Flynn Hustler case at the same time. So that's a little interesting twist on the story. But yeah, that's the genesis of my entry to this world.
So, needless to say, I guess some souls come into the world in a pretty harsh way. So you have immediately at a very, right out of the womb, things to deal with. But what you've done in your life and the things that you've overcome are all sort of a testimony to, your ability to overcome these obstacles.
Thank you.
How has that whole experience helped you with tackling issues and problems of the current day?
Well, I think, as a result, so in many ways, I would say. So the one thing is that I tend to have a lot of, I think everybody has intuitive abilities, but I don't depend on the kind of passive senses the way most people do. In fact, I started this podcast because when I was living out in California, everybody's faces was covered, right? Everybody's wearing all masked up and everybody's very isolated. And I didn't realize how much I still depended on nonverbal communication for clarity of speech until all the coping mechanisms I spent my whole life developing were then taken from me. And so that was kind of a big it was very, to say the least. I really just didn't realize it. But in fact, I do actually depend largely on, lip reading, nonverbal communication. I do wear hearing now, so I hear, but even with the hearing aids, I only get about 80% of the hearing that somebody who hears, binocularly without hearing aids. So that's but the thing that I do as a result is I can read a lot of nonverbal cues. I wouldn't call it like extra sensory perception necessarily, but I'm definitely reading more than just what I get from verbal, visual, tactile kinds of information. I'm definitely processing things in a way that I think a lot of it is pattern recognition, and I think I've had to use that. It's actually an interesting story because I had pointed out, this was not too, like maybe 2 years ago, but I was in the car with my mom and I started pointing out a bunch of signs, and I don't even remember what the conversation was, but I had told her, what I thought it meant. And she said, "How did you know that?" And I said, "Well, we saw that sign back there, and then we saw this one." And it reminded me, I had a tutor when I was 2 years old, and we used to read the Boxcar Children. And I would always tell her what was going to happen at the end. And she would ask me, "How do you know that? Did you read the end of the book?" And I said, "No, because, they told us this, this, this. And so I think this is what's going to happen because of these basically data points." And she explained to me that that's called foreshadowing. It was 2. I didn't know that. And she said, that's what the author does to kind of guide you, right? And to so that you have kind of a sense of where things are headed. And she said that that's a pattern recognition skill. And she said she was actually 104 years old. She was over a century years old. And she said, "No, I know, she was amazing, Mrs. Corey, rest her soul." But she really was amazing. But she said she had in all of her years in working with children never seen that. And I think that in part is because I don't depend on the passive senses the way that other people do. So maybe I had some innate talent for pattern recognition, but I think I really honed it because I was kind of dependent on it for my safety. and my survival. And I think that in what I do now with my research, I use that a lot. I started, like I said, I started the podcast because I wanted to have naked face conversations with people. I thought that it might literally save my life because I was so isolated and depressed. That just being able, even if it was through a digital interface, if I could see somebody's naked face and have meaningful discourse, that might do wonders for my morale, and it did. So that's part of it. It's part of how I even got into this whole world of research and podcasting and now writing and all sorts of the conferences and whatnot.
You are at 494, getting closer to 500 on the podcast. So you are perfect, to say the least, and congratulations there. And yeah, it's something to, just on a single podcast. I have two that I do tech talk in this one, and this is the long form, so to speak. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to have you on today, because you wrote a really hot article called The Phoenix Conspiracy. And this is what we're going to get into today. But I've sort of been watching you just from the background. I'm like, man, she is really going on a tangent here. But what really was interesting is a 9,700 word essay. I spent the morning, better part of between 4:30 and 6:30, just going through this article. 9,700 words, that's quite a lot. But what was really cool about it was it was sort of a capstone of your research, I would think. So why don't we jump into it, because this is a heavy topic. It's something that I was really waiting to see who out there, and I'm familiar with Patrick Wood. My guitar player, Rob, said, you should check out Patrick Wood. And I'm like, well, you should check out this article, Phoenix Conspiracy. And he goes, oh my God, it's right on the front page of Patrick, and so there are little synchronicities there. I said, I'm going to reach out to her and see if she wants to come on. But it was really well done. It's a lot of research, and according to Houston, you're working on 3 books. So prolific might be an understatement. Or yeah, it's great to have you on. Thanks for joining us. And for my listeners, I think you're really going to find this interesting. I will put all the links to her work underneath the article. Everything will be there for you guys. So this is one you definitely want to get a read of, because I think it's just a really great boiling down of all the things that are out in the AI. What is AI really for? Who are the tech bros? What are the network states? And what are the threats to the American constitutional republic? And this is what she really does, is tie it together and offers a solution at the end, which just gave me chills. If it doesn't have a solution, it doesn't really interest me. Everybody points out the problems all the time, but I thought the solution was really very simple too. So what really, let's just jump into it. What inspired you to write this article, and did you expect it? And to me, it's like it poured out.
I was on Jay Dyer's show recently, and he was like, how long did this take you? I was like, this is long.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I have another one, the Oracle algorithm that I had put out, and a lot of people were asking me if I could make that into something they could print out. And, I could have, but I didn't realize I'm in the process of formatting it, and I've added to it. But before I added anything, I was just working on formatting, and it's at like 120 pages. So yeah, I understand why people want something they can print in that format. So it is basically kind of a shorter book, but a book. It's not an article. And it ties into this, the Phoenix Conspiracy. That one is about the Delphi method and how that was spawned from the sensitivity training, Kurt Lewin's sensitivity training, which comes out of Tavistock Research, with Wilfred Bion, and then, of course, the Office of Naval Research and Naval Intelligence, and then the RAND Corporation had codified it into a very mechanistic, systematic kind of approach called the Delphi method. And those two have been merged in many in-person kind of consensus-making events. And now we live in an age of these cybernetic algorithms. And so it's about how those pave the way for this type of weaponization of consensus making through online portals. But the Phoenix Conspiracy, yeah. So I have been doing this research on 2 movements that I really believe are dialectic in nature. and they're funneling into this technocracy. And a lot of people are kind of more familiar, I think, currently with the Dark Enlightenment, because so many of these characters have such a huge influence on the current Trump administration. So although Curtis Yarvin has been writing and blogging for almost 2 decades, it's certainly not new. I think it's coming much more to the forefront because of the people in the Trump administration. I thought it was pretty funny that it was a few weeks ago, CNN talked about how there's this guy, he's been blogging for almost a decade. I'm like, it's actually been almost 2, but who's been counting? Apparently not you. And they said, but now it's really concerning because he really has an influence on the Trump administration. No kidding. Yes. And they're actually right. I mean, I'm not a CNN watcher, but they're absolutely right. It is concerning. But I've been tracking something that the way I describe it, and I describe it in this article, is that they oftentimes these, well, we'll just say the occultists, they tend to operate through left-hand, right-hand paths, and they do operate on dialectics. And that's my other book. It's on Hegel's dialectic, and I call it Hegel's Dialectic, a Gnostic Jacob's Ladder, and a Machinery of Control. And I have a preview of that on my Substack as well, but I'm further developing that into a publishable book. But I have been watching this movement called Game B. And the way it looks to me is Game B operates through the left-hand path, where they worship like Divine Mother, Gaia religion. A lot of them are tied to UN, Sustainable Development Goals, very theosophical.
Covered the New Age movement, massive Gaia worship. Yeah.
Yes. Barbara Marx Hubbard is a huge mentor to a lot of the Game B proponents and advocates, and some of them are very overtly, worship or aligned with, I'll say, Teilhard de Chardin. They talk about collective intelligence, but they're talking about inhabiting the noosphere. There's actually technology, Game B technology. One of them was originally called NoMap. And they literally say to inhabit the noosphere. So that's the Game B, and they're operating through kind of this left-hand path. And then you have the right-hand path, which is the Dark Enlightenment. And they're much more patriarchal, kind of this, very autocratic, disciplinarian, overtly like muscular in nature. In terms of archetype. And so I'm watching these two, and I've been really studying these philosophical movements, and of course the implementation, like what their practical implementation politically. And then I've been also kind of watching this political movement, and I did an article called The Technological Age of Aquarius, Third Way Dream or Digital Dystopia. And what I'm seeing is they're using third way politics, which is, again, dialectical in nature. This is out of the Fabian Society. Anthony Giddens wrote a book on third way, and he talks about concentrating the radical center. And it's very misleading, as typically they are. I mean, the Fabians are the ones who co-opted the word liberal, which, in order to, and they knew what they were doing, and they said it. They explicitly knew that they were deceiving people when they co-opted this term that originally had a connotation of classical liberalism, which is antithetical to leftism,
Sure.
But they had inverted it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and there's a great article, I've posted it on my Twitter before, that goes into depth on how the Fabians did this. But Anthony Giddens talks about this radical center, and he says it will always be left of center. So for those who are thinking, oh, great, we're going to have like a moderate party, which is what Elon's trying to sell it as, that's not what they're talking about. So I've been watching this, and there's a lot of overlap with what's going on with Elon Musk and the American Party, what's going on with Game B and all of this synergistic democracy movements, and how that's being funneled into this third way movement, which now Elon Musk's American Party, where he's got the support of Andrew Yang, who's totally a technocrat, right? It's not left, it's not right, it's forward. That's his slogan. And now he's also consulting with Curtis Yarvin, Dark Enlightenment, neo-reactionary figure. And it's really paving the way for the technocracy. That's what they're using the tactics of third way policy to implement technocracy. And so I had kind of been just watching this. And then I wrote another article on the path to mass surveillance, outlining the deception of the names of all of these different types of smart cities. And so, it's just different branding. And the way I like to describe it is you've got a buffet of ice cream, and it's not made with the good stuff, right? It's not like real cream, sugar, like natural stuff. It's all chemicals and poison. But they've got all these different flavors, and it looks so pretty. And if you want strawberry or vanilla or chocolate, they've got a pretty packaging to sell you, And so, they'll give you lots of sugar to swallow the, poisonous medicine. And that's kind of what I was seeing with all of these 15-minute cities. You've got the 15-minute city, you've got smart cities, C40 cities, which is the UN environmentalist flavor. Then you've got Trump's freedom cities, which, I mean, who could argue with that? Who doesn't want to live in a freedom city? But it's kind of the same thing. When you start to scratch away the pretty label that says freedom city and you start to look beneath the surface, it's really a 15-minute city. It's a smart city. It's a surveillance state. And then we've got Jordan Hall, Game B's Civium project. So we're now going to exit the cities, which, okay, a lot of more freedom-minded people are very much looking in that direction. So this sounds really appealing. And then you realize that it's basically just another network state, and it's another surveillance trap. So I was looking at that, and then, of course, I had been researching the network states, and I realized that the network states is kind of the dialectical synthesis, and it is the hybrid of both of these left and right-hand paths. They're all talking about network states. And Balaji Srinivasan,
One moment. Could you explain more of dialectic?
sure.
How would you define that? And I know that Hegel, when he talked about it, he didn't use the words thesis, antithesis. Those were attributed to him by, I think, Schelling. But Heraclitus, if I'm right. So the dialectical process is very old. So just explain a little bit to the audience, if you would.
Yes. So in my book, and even in the preview that I have on my Substack, I outline going all the way back to the ancient mystery religion. And they have this kind of obsession, I would just say, with this unity of opposites. So they have these polarities, and then through the synthesis, they believed you could achieve transcendence. And so this is really their path to self-apotheosis, right? It's a very Gnostic worldview whereby, that's the path through the gnosis that you can achieve this divine gnosis and become God. That's the theurgy, if you will, in the theosophical terms. So I outline all of these ancient mystery religions who subscribe to this belief system. And they, of course, this is proto-Hegel. So this is not, they don't frame it as, as dialectic. But then we get Plato, and he does really outline, the dividing line and, the intelligible realm, the unintelligible realm. And so I would say that's really the precursor to this codification of a dialectic. And then, as you mentioned, Hegel never said thesis, antithesis, synthesis. That was actually Fichte's interpretation of Kant's dialectic. And Kant talked a lot about the dialectic, but Fichte had interpreted it as the thesis, antithesis, synthesis, and of course, this is the English translation. And Hegel rejected, but it was also, I think, who popularized Fichte's codification of thesis, antithesis, synthesis was also Chalybos. He was a Hegel scholar. I might be mispronouncing his name, but phonetically, that's what it is, Chalybos. So he was a Hegel scholar, and he was deriving that from Fichte, who had interpreted Kant's dialectic as being thesis, antithesis, synthesis. But Hegel rejected both Kant and Plato's notion of the dialectic because he was really looking for something that was a little bit more of a tool, like something that could be used to advance the historicity of man, to advance the Geist, right? Weltgeist, the world spirit, which he believed would advance towards the world absolute. And this is where he talks about the freedom, right? This is the radical freedom of man. But in my book, I make this distinction that that's not free will. And I think oftentimes people conflate the two. And a lot of times, a lot of these more, mystics, they will talk about freedom, but they're talking about it in a radical freedom collectivist end. And free will is not an end. So some examples would be like Nietzschean will to power, or Crowley's dilemma, right? This is do what thou wilt. And this is it is about a collectivist radical end. So he believed that would be the world spirit would move towards this rational absolute, which wasn't really rational in the way we think of it at all. He actually says the rational is speculative, which is no different than mystical. So he was signaling to the initiated, and it was spoken Aesopian language. But he said that it was the what did he say? The absolute concrete, so absolute negative concrete. So which is very similar, but the thing that's missing in the thesis, antithesis, synthesis that's captured in this kind of the English translation of having this, the negative and the abstract, negative and concrete, is that you have this abstract, which is not. It's abstract, right? It's an idea. And now we need to be able to take it up the spiral, right, towards the omega point. And so the negative, that term in German is Aufheben. And Aufheben is a very complicated oxymoronic term. It means to lift up and preserve while simultaneously canceling and tearing down. So it hollows out the thing. So, this is where the Frankfurt School codified Aufheben de culture, right? So, which I don't think needs explanation for the audience, cancel culture. Unfortunately, too many of us have experienced firsthand. But that's essentially, right, you have this notion of something that gets hollowed out from within, but then it gets synthesized and advanced. So it becomes a new version, almost a simulacra of what it was through this, Hegelian synthesis. So it is kind of very philosophically dense, but I don't know if that gives kind of maybe the most Cliff Note version I could possibly do.
Yeah. And just to add to that, I don't know, the feeling I get is that Hegel would be rolling in his grave if he saw how, say, Karl Marx and the Romantics kind of twisted his dialectic view. Because one can say that dialectics is a staple of human life. A man and a woman who are married have two opposing views of what they should do with the color of the paint on the wall. But yet to talk about it and come to a synthesis, it's obvious we all do this dialectic process. So would you say that there's a positive dialectic process, and that this group of, inversionists just want to use the process to initiate a technocracy with AI as the new god?
It actually wouldn't. I would say Hegel himself was very aligned. Yes, Marx did invert it for his ends. But the thing that Hegel was doing was trying to, in his terms, advance the historicity of man. So he believed that there were world historical figures who would help us to reach it, very similar kind of to like Teilhard de Chardin's vision of this noosphere. It is a collective end, and that the world spirit. And that is very different to me than when you're talking about emerging. So you've got like that is symbiotic. Like a man and a woman to me are symbiotic, but they don't lose each other and become one, right? You're still very much a husband and a wife are, yes, absolutely. They are compatible. They, they can harmonize each other. They're very symbiotic, and they can together create and develop beautiful things. I mean, they can create life together, right? So, but they don't become one. They're not, they still retain their own individual unique identity. And that's the difference. And I think that's a really important distinction, because part of what they're doing, and what Hegel was talking about, is to create this radical collective end. And that's why I keep pointing out the distinction between free will and freedom, because free will is a vehicle. it's a conduit for virtue, for morality. It's not an end at all. It's actually, in many ways, it's just a beginning. And to me, it's this beautiful gift that we were endowed with from our Creator, right? That He gives us this beautiful gift of free will. And yes, He's hoping that you choose Him, that you choose good, that you choose virtue, that you make good, moral, honorable choices in your life. But He knows we will sin. Sin literally means to miss the mark, right? So we're human, we're fallible, we will miss the mark. But that is, we always have those choices. And, in every day, in every moment, we can keep making new choices towards the virtue, towards the good, towards the beautiful. And that's the difference to me. Whereas freedom is not that. Freedom is this radical collective in the way that they're describing. Barbara Marx Hubbard talks about radical freedom too. And she is not talking about free will. So no, I actually really think Hegel is very influenced by people like Fichte, who had direct ties to Pestalozzi, to, he was very tied up with that Illuminati circle. And he had a lot of, it's like spiritual, mystical influences. So Rosicrucian, Hermeticism, he was very, so I outline all of those, the Rosicrucian, the Hermetic, the alchemical, Kabbalah. Yeah. So
what point does communism roll out of all of this?
Of which?
Of this?
Hegel or?
Just the whole timeline. Somewhere in the 17th, 18th century, communism rolls out. It's the French Revolution.
Right.
And then it just morphs, into this technocratic desire to merge with AI. And then you have Thiel and others who, if you heard him talk in an interview a couple of weeks ago, it was horrifying, things he was saying, we can just change out our brain if we don't like it, or our minds, or it's more than just transvestites, or literally change body parts or change our entire mind out for a new mind. And it was just, listening to that, I was just appalled. I was like, this guy is really off his rocker. But yeah, it's like, it's sort of this, communism comes out and then it rolls out over, a couple of centuries, and then it culminates, you could say, as one dialectic, one side of the dialectic. And then you have this other side, which is, you mentioned the, I'm sorry, I have to look the term, but the churchers, the
Theo bros.
Theo bros.
Yeah.
So is this sort of the two that you see playing against each other?
Yeah. So, I mean, if you look back at like some of the Trilateral Commission figures, people like Brzezinski and Kissinger, they talked about how we would see this ideological clash of essentially the East and the West, like the communists and the fascists, and how they would be pitted against each other. And emerging would be the technocracy. They don't word it literally in those terms, but that's essentially what they portend, that's what's going to happen. And I think that's very much what we're seeing today. There's a constant discussion back and forth, this dialectic of the left and right, which that's why I really describe it as left and right hand paths, because they're not separate. They're being utilized to create the churn, the spiraling churn, right? The dialectic churns towards the omega point, which is what their end vision is. And, it looks like the noosphere is the singularity is where they're headed. So, yeah, I definitely think they use communism, and they use concepts from communism, this distributism, the idea of the words like, equality and, sorry, not equality, equity, which people interpret as being equality, but they're different. Equality is a legal term, equality under the law, but they're talking about equity, which, everybody's equal at the bottom, right? So that's what it means. You're going to cater to the lowest denominator.
That averaged everybody's grade and they all failed.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah. So, these certainly take elements, and it's a very collectivist mindset, which is, and they have to create a revolution in order to achieve their goal. That's the whole premise behind the Phoenix conspiracy, right? They have to phoenix the Republic. They have to phoenix the West. So in order to achieve their goals. But technocracy is not communism. I mean, yes, there's elements in scientific socialism, right? There's elements, but it is its own thing. And that's why I think that's why the dialectic is so effective. We're going to argue about whether we're in fascism or communism while they're marching us towards the technocracy, because that's really where they want us to end up, because that is the ultimate control. It is the ultimate tyranny. And I think it's a tyranny unlike what most people have the capacity to even fathom. It is truly, truly tyrannical, totalitarian, really and it's a neo-feudal system, really is what it is. So I do think they pit them against each other, and that's why you're seeing like the Game B, I would say, operate much more, they're under communist type principles. They're much more socialistic in their mindset and their framework and in terms of what their aims are. But the network states are all communitarianism ultimately. And communitarianism. So even Game B, they talk about, because they're basing it off of Dunbar's scaling, where they say, they want to keep everything under 150 people because that's where you don't need bureaucracy. But to think that just because you're in a small community, then like a network state, for instance, that somehow that it's not going to be tyrannical is, I think, incredibly misguided.
Interesting. Did you hear that the Genius Act passed?
Yes.
Yeah. So that just sort of moves us closer. And I must say I respect Marjorie Taylor Greene, because she makes one of the only ones making the effort to show us the transparency here. But yeah, just what are your thoughts on the Genius Act as it relates to this Phoenix conspiracy?
Well, I think it's laying the groundwork. So what we have is we've got Trump, who keeps saying like he's against CBDCs. We're pushing back on the central bank digital currencies. He did his executive order when he first got into office. And I think it's because they have to market things for their audience, right? And in the West, and particularly in the United States, something like a central bank digital currency is not going to be a very good selling point. A lot of people are wise to that. They're rejecting the UN. They don't want that kind of top-down worldwide surveillance kind of state. So they know that central bank digital currencies are a conduit for that. And so a lot of people will push back. But when you couch it in something like stable coins or Bitcoin that's tied to the Federal Reserve, it's going to be a reserve currency, which is antithetical, by the way, to everything that the Bitcoin enthusiasts were supporting. That is not what Bitcoin was designed to be.
Right. Decentralized. Yeah.
Exactly. Right. So, but now so the marketing is very clever. He's, really pushed back and against the central bank digital currency, but with things like the Genius Act, the Stable Act, the Clarity Act, he's paving the way for us to have all of these stable coins, which are essentially the exact same thing, and the results will be the same. And this is really, really horrifying to me, because this is the path to tokenization. I have a whole chapter in this Phoenix Conspiracy where I talk about tokenization, and all of these people talk about tokenization. So whether you're in the Game B camp, the Dark Enlightenment, the network states, Balaji Srinivasan's, they all talk about the wonderful aspects of tokenization. And to me, tokenization is the ultimate control for technocracy. Just from if we look at it just in a very rudimentary capacity, just the fact that it's programmable is, inherently makes it a control grid. But when we start adding things like now we've got RFK, which was such a bait and switch, but I warned people before Trump even got in that Maha was a Trojan horse. And of course, it's so clever. I mean, who could argue with Make America Healthy Again? I mean, I'm all on board. Let's get rid of the seed oil. Let's get rid of the, garbage chemicals in all of our food and the pesticides and, all of the unnecessary, big pharma push. And who couldn't agree with that? That seems like just basic common sense, right? Let's get back to some just, basic health. So things that other countries do fairly much better than we do. I'll say that. But I said that he was going to use that to usher in precision AI medicine. And this was something he was very supportive of. And, we can go back to the Obama White House archives where he's talking about his position in AI medicine initiative. This is all tied in with like the brain initiative. And so I was very, very concerned about that. And then, of course, Trump comes in, rolls out Project Stargate, and we've got Larry Ellison talking about how we're going to use mRNA technology and we're going to cure the C illness and, all sorts of wonderful things. Yeah. So, and now we've got RFK talking about how MAHA is really MABA. It's Make America Biotech Accelerate. He actually says accelerate, like accelerationism, right? That's intrinsic. It's embedded in that acronym. And so and he's talking about how we all need to be wearing the wearables, right? The Internet of Wearables, which is connected to the Internet of everything. So if you just take that as the next level with tokenization, collecting all this biometric data, and then you layer on top of it, of course, we've got Elon with his chips, right? The Neuralink, which people tend to forget that Charles Lever was his partner on Neuralink. He patented the neural lace technology, and Lever also worked with Robert Langer. So, that's a whole other rabbit hole that people can look into, but it's connected to this notion of the Internet of Nanobio things. And I think that's really where they're headed, because all the research and the groundwork has been laid for that. And if we connect that to tokenization, we're going to be in an episode of Black Mirror.
Yeah, it's very interesting. One thing that I wanted to talk about too, it's going to go back a little bit, but back in 2005, 6, 7, I was on the mailing list for Lyndon LaRouche.
Okay.
For quite a lot of stuff was coming to me. And
sure.
My contact was like, we're just going to send you stuff and you just put it out, just stack it out. So I started, I kind of got into his writings a lot because they had made a bit more political sense to me, that I had been open to this new world of alternative views of politics. And so I found his stuff favorable, his Children of Satan book, and things like that, his work on music and tuning and standards of that, ilk and whatnot. But I was taking stacks of these books and I'd leave them at the Walmart, and I'd come back a couple days later and they were gone. So people were picking them up. But I found it interesting too that you had, made a few posts where you highlighted things that he had written, and it sparked things in my memory. So that's kind of why I was paying attention to your posts. But again, the Phoenix conspiracy sort of like was a culminating point for me, at least, to come to like a mountaintop. So it was nice to see that. How did LaRouche play a role in helping shape your view? How did that open you to, a lot of the things that you might have culminated to now?
Well, I think LaRouche definitely points to a lot of alternative perspectives that we might not be exposed to otherwise. So he's a good researcher. I don't always agree with his synthesis. So I don't take him as, I don't take anybody as like just face value, like I'll, incorporate everything they say.
Right.
But I think it's a good launching pad for a lot of material, especially when it comes to a lot of the like Tavistock research I was doing. That's really where I found him, because he was covering a lot of material pertaining to Tavistock, and I was doing so much research on that. Was kind of my my gateway into this research was Tavistock. So I had found him, and he does a lot of good work in that regard. So and he has a lot of material that I couldn't find anywhere else. So that was really helpful. But what I do with anybody is especially if it's a secondary source, I use them as a springboard. So it's not like I take their analysis and now, I take that as the word, I don't incorporate their synthesis. Instead, I use their their synthesis to start pulling threads and to start finding the original sources that they're drawing from. And he does have a lot of sources. So, so that's really, so I was able to use that. And like, for instance, with the Tavistock research, then I was able to find more books from the Tavistock psychologists themselves that he was pointing to. And so it was a great springboard for a lot of my research in that.
Mhm.
Like I said, I don't always agree with his conclusion, but
Sure. I had to tell Tim, stop sending me stuff, and no, I can't make any more donations. He'd always ask me for a donation every time he sent me a stack of stuff, and I'm like, I'm on a fixed income, bro. I can't just be giving you guys all my money. But
I know.
made a couple of donations because I was interested. But I agree, absolutely. You have to just take the best points of somebody's research and move ahead, because you got to keep moving, and
He was also very helpful in I've done a lot of research on changing images of man, Stanford Research Institute, and he helped me pull a lot of threads on that as well. So, yeah.
Same here. The Tavistock angle was huge. I think that's the first I had actually read more in depth than just passing name, because a lot of researchers in my early time of looking into conspiracy in the early 2000s, Tavistock would fly by. Fabian Society would fly by, and in a quick mention, but really a breakdown of it. And that's what I was going to ask next, is the influence of Tavistock on this Phoenix conspiracy, and how much of this is MI6, how much of this is Britain? Because one of my theories is that, Britain is, let's just say, they're not over the fact that they lost 200 ago, and they still want revenge. It's, Herbert Marcuse's long march through the institutions. If it takes 100 years, we will infiltrate every single one of them. Fifth column media, just all this different stuff, which they have done successfully. But how much of this is Britain? How much of it is Tavistock led?
So the way I look at the control grid, from what we can see, there's obviously puppet masters that are, elite families that are, somewhat at the top. We can only speculate. I don't have all the receipts on that. So I'm not going to say with certitude that I know like who the ultimate puppet master is. I don't. And I don't think anybody really does. We have clues, and we can definitely see that there are some dynastic families, and, certainly the central banks, who I think the dynastic families have large stake in. So, we've got clues. We can't really say definitively. So, but what I do look at is we do have the central banks, and that's almost like its own entity. Like the Bank of International Settlements, for instance, I think is a huge power player. And then we've got the 3 city states. So we've got the Vatican, right? And we've got the City of London, and we've got Washington, D.C., and they are city states, right? Washington, D.C. is its own thing, right? It's not part of another state. It's Washington, D.C. So I think they very much work together. I don't think that they are separate. I think there's a reason they call it the Five Eyes. Our military industrial complex is working in tandem and working as a consortium. And I see Tavistock as very much the psychological operation arm of MI6. And there's lots of evidence for this. That's not so much just, speculation. I mean, World War II, even World War I, the British War Propaganda Bureau, which, a lot of evidence points to that being the precursor to the Tavistock Clinic. But certainly World War II, without a doubt. I mean, the Tavistock was instrumental in creating the War Office selection boards. This was how they how they chose their military leader. And I actually think it's what led to the Meist-Rascals framework for choosing, intelligence assets and change agents. And you can find that document on the CIA.gov, and they go through it pretty explicitly. Mice's money, ideology, coercion, ego. These are really good kind of profiles for selecting change agents, if you will. And they outline that very extensively in that article. But I do think that was drawn from these War Office selection boards, which led to Operation Phoenix in Tavistock, which was the restructuring from the Tavistock Clinic to open up the Tavistock Institute of Human Relations. And this was Wilfred Bynes, was kind of the leader of this restructuring of the organization. Once they got a grant, there were other people involved, but mostly it was the grant from the Rockefellers that enabled them to be able to open up the Institute. And the Institute does more mass scale type of research, more corporate arm type of research, group dynamics type of facilitation, whereas the clinic does more one-on-one. But, the World War I, they said, okay, we're going to study the post-traumatic stress disorder of the soldiers. So they called it shell shock therapy. So it was very kind of one-on-one. And then they took that and they said, the soldiers were traumatized. People were traumatized by the war. So we've got to study their breaking point. And then you get to World War II and everybody's traumatized. So now everybody becomes a Tavistock patient, and it gives them kind of this carte blanche justification for doing mass scale experimentation of trauma-based mind control. And I think there's a lot of evidence to indicate that that's exactly what they did. They extrapolated what they learned from calculating breaking points on individuals to the masses. And I think we see that in Operation Phoenix with Vietnam, and which is another Phoenix reference, right? And so I think the psychological arm largely comes from MI6 tied to Tavistock, but I think that the muscular arm is America. We've been used as like the bully of the world, right? We're the front facing that's going to go and fight with all our weapons, and but I think it's much more intricate than people want to believe. I think there's a lot of money coming out of like Vatican kind of structures. I think the tactics of a lot of what you see out of the Tavistock trauma-based mind control and some of these more spiritualistic, like Esalen type of psychedelic transcendence, a lot of these techniques, I think, actually come out of Jesuit training. So it's just much more complicated than people want to believe. Everybody's looking to, I always like to make the joke that the only game people learned when they were growing up was pin the tail on the donkey. So they just want to point the finger and say, like, that's who it is. It's their fault. They're responsible for all the problems in the world. And I'm like, if only were that simple, then we could, maybe get closer to solving it. So.
Right. And you can look at different writings about the church and psychedelic use. It goes back several thousand years, back to Egypt. If you want to say that the priesthood of Egypt is just, the latest extension of it is the Catholic Church priesthood for the most part.
And I will just be very clear to make the distinction. I'm not talking about traditional Catholicism.
Right.
All religions have been infiltrated, subverted. Traditional Catholicism is very different, especially since Vatican II, totally different. And a lot of what we're seeing right now, there's a lot of infiltration. And so I just want to make that distinction. I'm not going after people who are traditionalists. Yeah.
Right. Well, it's interesting too, because the Catholic Church is really the impetus for academia. I mean, everything rolled out of these.
So they were masters of education, and they trading in largely.
Art, you have a separation of mind and body now, the division into the two camps, science and religion, which have eternally been at war with each other, at least seemingly. But then you have the John M. Allegro's Sacred Mushroom and the Cross, who shows that, the sacrament was the Amanita muscaria. This, like you said, it goes back. There's a lot more to the story, and how it all ties together. So with your article, you get into the points of, the accelerationist architect. I love the fact that you named so many names. It just shows that you're very well researched. And folks, if you want to get, you better take a notepad with you, because there's a whole lot of names in this article that just, really point. It's very well done, very well researched. And that's why I wanted to have you on, just to, share in this. And so tell us about Nick Land a little bit and how he plays into all of this.
Well, Nick Land is a very interesting character. He was one of the forerunners of the CCRU, which was the Cybernetic Culture Research Unit in Warwick University, part of their philosophy department. I think it was created by, I don't know if they co-created or it was, or she preceded him, but it was Sadie Plant, who was a feminist and like a cyberpunk feminist. So they were doing research, and this cybernetic culture research unit was pretty out there. Just that alone was, you can go, mostly you'll have to go to the Wayback Machine, but you can find, and I have a lot of links in this article. So, and a lot of them are from the Wayback. And so he also, like Yarvin, had been blogging for a very long time. He has his Xenosystems. It's now called Xenogothic. But one of the links I have is actually xenosystems.demon.uk. So he was very much into the occult. Said like Lovecraft inspired him. Julius Evola was a huge inspiration for Nick Land. And he has terms like Shoggoth, where he's literally and hyperstition, where he's talking about literally taking these fictional ideas, characters, essences, and manifesting reality out of fiction. So that's a really important thing for people to recognize. And I hope I conveyed this in the article, but these are not people who are rooted in reality. And I think it's so important for them to push this constructivist and nominalist worldview onto the masses in order to achieve their technological immanentization of the eschaton, because the technological immanentization of the eschaton is creating a synthetic world. They're trying to bring heaven on earth, but they have to do it through synthetic reality, right? That's why we're seeing transhumanism, synthetic biology, synthetic food. They want to terraform everything in order to achieve this singularity. The technological immanentization of the eschaton is how I call it, because to them that's their heaven on earth. But I think it's going to be hell on earth, honestly. Yeah, that's my opinion. There's some cyber Satan, not a deity. It's not Christ. It's a cyber Satan, is what it looks like to me. Well,
A techno Christ, really. And how much of this, like this Nick Land character, how much of these do these guys attribute their, because Lori, you met Lori, and I mentioned, this article, and she's perused it, and she goes, "My God, dude, is this true? Are we being run by aliens?" So I know they reference alien intelligence and stuff, but through your research, how much of this do they play into this idea of alien intelligence, like actual, off-world extraterrestrials or interterrestrials? And have you run into that at all with these characters?
I don't think when they say alien, I don't think they're talking about, so Game B people, maybe more so. They would be more likely to subscribe to like the Palladians, the Star Seeds, right? The Arcturians. Like the Game B types are much more likely to subscribe to that worldview. I think the Dark Enlightenment figures, when they're talking about alien, they're talking about AI. They're talking about synthetic intelligence, artificial intelligence is what they're talking about. So they're, or, alien to human, but they're not talking about interdimensional type beings, and at least not from what I can see in the research that I've done. But Nick Land, so he had this theory that, capitalism is an apocalyptic state. It's doomed to fail. It's going to implode, but that we should take it to its nth degree, that we should use capitalism, push it forward as fast and as aggressively as possible, so that we should use technology to do it, so that it will, implode. And then we can achieve this, GovCorp state that he talks about. For Curtis Yarvin, he talks about SovCorp. Nick Land talks about GovCorp, and he says how we're going to become technoplastic beings. This is like the synthetic biology, transhuman merging of man with machine. And we have so much predictive programming for this, by the way, in the movies, right? I just went to see Megan 2, And it's literally using this synthetic biology to create these robots that are, human-like and take on human form and to merge with the machine. They integrate with machines. So that's what he was foreshadowing with his technoplastic being. And this use of cybernetics is very integral to this whole worldview. He also talks about a mechanistic future where humanity is going to be reshaped and eclipsed by technology, which is essentially the singularity. He talks about mechanistic desire, this burning desire for the singularity. He derives a lot of his beliefs from Deleuze and Guattari, and he of course takes it further, and he talks about deterritorialization, and this is very reminiscent of network state type of worldview, where we're not going to be attached to any geographical nation state. This is where we can have a territory in the cloud, right? So it'll be cybernetic ideological network states. And because he preceded Balaji Srinivasan, but it's a very similar view that we're no longer going to be attached to physical land, physical anything really. It's all in, it's like mentalism essentially, but using technology to achieve that. And so that's kind of Nick Land, and he, merges with Curtis Yarvin, also a lovely character. And they both think that we have to get rid of this, notion of constitutionalism, capitalism, territorial geographic domain. And we need to create either, he calls it GovCorp, Curtis Yarvin calls it SovCorp, but it's the same kind of concept where we're going to have a CEO dictatorship. And Curtis Yarvin says that the problem with America is it needs a reboot, right? We have to reboot the government. And part of that is going to be rage, retire all government employees. This was very influential on Doge. But he says that part of the problem with this reboot that America needs is that America has to get over their fear of dictatorship in order to achieve this, because the CEO needs to be a dictator.
I don't say it. Isn't that something? How does this, the thought of, it just reeks of communism in a sense, too, the loss of private property, but also the idea of a techno-utopia. Utopia is a big deal for
scientific socialism,
these kinds of mindsets, and in contrast to like a Noah Yuval Harari, how do these guys compare with him?
So I would say Game B is more aligned with Yuval Noah Harari, kind of working through that left-hand path.
And just explain Game B just a little more.
So Game B is much more scientific socialism, whereas I would say like Dark Enlightenment is like straight up techno-feudalism. They're just going right there. Game B will get you there because socialism always ends. That's where it will end. It will end in technocracy, but they're taking you through a much softer route. It's more soft power. It's very reminiscent of Fabian, like moral ethic, right? The social ethic that they will persuade you and you will opt into it. You will be convinced that this is the universal moral grammar, to use the language of the UN. That's much more Fabian style incrementalism. Game B was spawned out of what was called the Emancipation Party. So the initial, I guess, catalyst was Eric Weinstein, who Jordan Hall calls the rabbi of Game B, had insisted he meet his brother, Brett Weinstein. And Brett Weinstein was actually how I discovered Game B. So he went to this event where it was right after the crash, the stock market, crisis in 2008, the financial crisis. And Eric Weinstein was doing a presentation there. He does mention plan A, plan B, but he was in economic terms. He didn't say Game B, but it was at the Perimeter Institute. And he insisted that Jordan meet his brother, Brett. They met. And Jordan says, I guess the ideas didn't really kick off then. But then Jordan Hall was working with the Santa Fe Institute, and Jim Rutt was chairman of the Santa Fe Institute. Jim Rutt became brought into the Santa Fe Institute because he was working on this technology called evolutionary software. And this is part of why he brings in people like Brett Weinstein, evolutionary biologists. So there's these Stanton meetings back in 2011 that Jim Rutt was hosting in Stanton, Virginia, to try and launch what he called the Emancipation Party. And in my Technological Age of Aquarius article, I have a link to, and I think a screenshot too, of the reforms of the Emancipation Party, which is very reminiscent of like a Bernie Sanders. They want universal health care, they want universal basic income, their variation of it, but a lot of those types of platform. And the way Jim Rutt describes it is that he could get the boomers on. They were all in. They really loved this idea. He said Gen X, he thinks he could have negotiated, he could have warmed them up to it. But the millennials who loved the platform were such anarchists that the idea of a political party was anathema to them. And he said, well, we can't do a political movement without the millennials. So, kind of tanked the idea. And it was Thor Mueller, who was part of these meetings, who said you should keep the term Game B. They kept talking about Game B for branding purposes. And Game B, what they say is that it's a new operating system for civilization. So how they describe it is that it's omni-win. It's win-win dynamics. It's anti-rivalrous. So, Game A is too competitive, too extractive, too exploitative. We need to move into essentially very much like the changing images of man, right? The age of Aquarius, which is all about the collective, collaborative. It's not competitive. So we're not focused on the age of Pisces, which was about the individual, which breeds competition. We need to move into the collective. And Bruce Lipton, who, he's an evolutionary leader, he talks about how, and he was an evolutionary biologist, and he talks about how the amoeba had so much intelligence because of the membrane, but then we evolved to become a multicellular organism, and then we become more intelligent because we have more membrane. And then he says, humans, we're these complex multicellular organisms, and the reason we're so intelligent is because we have so much surface area of membrane. And of course, he uses a dialectical spiral to illustrate this. And they love their spirals. Barbara Marx Hubbard, too, with her, Crisis of Our Birth, Wheel of Co-Creation spiral. But he says that we are now at a crossroads where humanity can go extinct, or we can choose to co-create, which is another Game B term. This is straight out of Barbara Marx Hubbard, right? Co-create. We're going to co-create with God, right? The hubris of that. But we're going to co-create and become the superorganism of humanity. And what does he say the membrane of the superorganism of humanity is? It's the internet. And so I think that very much illustrates when Game B, they talk about collective intelligence. So we're, they're going to create this collective intelligence. They have all these words that are buzzwords that you need a glossary to really understand what they're saying, because it's not what it sounds like sense making, which is really about consensus making. So that's Game B. A lot of them are disciples of Barbara Marx Hubbard. As I said, I found out about Game B because of Brett Weinstein. He had done a speech for the Rescue the Republic. And he, at the end of the speech, talks about how he kept talking about the West, which I found very strange because it was supposed to be about the Republic, which would be specifically the United States. Now, yes, we're part of Western civilization. We're a byproduct of Western civilization, I think. And, they're definitely trying to deracinate us from those roots. And which, I don't support. However, we are the United States, and it's a republic. It's a constitutional republic. It's not the whole West. And this was supposed to be focused on the republic. And he kept saying the West. And then he says, we have to phoenix the republic because of the problems with the West.
Oh.
And I was kind of taken aback. What does he mean by Phoenix the Republic? So I started doing a little bit of digging into him, and it found he was one of the progenitors of this Game B movement. And it does seem he was one of the speakers at the Independent Nationalist Convention. And this is hearsay because I can't find his speech. There's no YouTube of it. Yeah. I went to the Wayback Machine to find the website, which I have linked in my article, but I can't find the video. They do say he was a keynote speaker, and they do have a picture, which I put in the article, of the Phoenix, and they talk about, phoenixing, but the rumor is that the title of his keynote speech was Self-Governance and Phoenixing the Republic. Now, I can't corroborate that, but I wouldn't be surprised because that was 2023. And then 2024, he does his Phoenix the Republic speech at Rescue the Republic. And so this concept of Phoenixing the Republic seems very integral to achieving their goals. They have to tear down to build back better. Right. So, but that is how I found out about Game B. And, it's right on his Twitter, like his profile, who says Game B. I mean, it's not covert at all. You can go and look at his videos with Brett Weinstein talking about what is Game B. You can look at the it's a very long article that was started in 2018, but Jim Rutt has updated it since. It's called A Journey to Game B. And what I think is very interesting about it is that he says the proto Game Bs will be in 2045. And I find that number very fascinating, of course, prediction. But when is the AI World Society? The centennial vision of the UN is the Artificial World Intelligence Society. It's 2045, centennial of the UN. When does Kurzweil predict that the singularity will emerge? 2045. He says singularity is nearer now. So I thought that was very interesting timing. And, you could say it's a coincidence, but Jim Rutt is not a stupid guy. He is he's quite a fascinating character, actually. He was like on the ground floor of, the raising the venture capital for what became T-Mobile. He was involved in like this DVIX. So, it's like a crypto type of technology. He network solutions. He was CEO of that. So he's been involved in on the ground floor of a lot of very interesting tech venture startup stuff.
So you mentioned Game E. Did you find out, was there a Game A? And can you tell us about that?
Yes. So they do talk about Game A. And for those who are interested in like a deep dive on Game B, I did a 3.5-hour presentation on Game B, if that's your thing. You can find that on my channel. I've done literally, I think, 15 episodes covering Game B. I've done the dive on it. Yeah. So, but there is, and in that presentation, I play half of this video, but you can find the full one is on the STOA. Which is a YouTube channel, and they're a Game B host. Like they do a lot of dialogos, is what Game B calls it, on the STOA. And they put out a film. It's called An Initiation to Game B. If that doesn't say everything, it's an initiation, right? So what they do is they lay out, there was like a proto Game A. And it looks like this very kind of Neoplatonic kind of a world, very, very much glorifying like the indigenous type of populations and world, lifestyle. And, it's pagan. And so they have that. That's the proto. And then they say there's Game A. Game A emerged, and they talk about how Game A is extractive, it's exploitative, it's competitive, it's rivalrous, and that's what we're in now. And they say that Game A is doomed to fail, much like the Dark Enlightenment. People feel capitalism's going to fail, right? We're going to face these polycrises, this is apocalyptic state, and we just might as well accelerate to get there faster.
That's to the T, right?
Yes. And so Klaus Schwab, I would say, yeah, it's kind of a merger. He's got elements of both, but I would say he's more of the Game B flavor. Right. Schwab, you've all know Harari, everything's focused on the Gaia religion and how we need to usher in all of these fourth industrial revolution, green energy type of protocols so that we can save the planet from the planetary crisis of because man has created this planetary crisis, which the Club of Rome, by the way, admitted was a propaganda in their own writings, and I actually have that in one of my articles as well. I have the, screenshot from the Club of Rome's Global Revolution document in 1992, admitting that they needed a common enemy for us to rally around. And that's why in the Limits to Growth in 1971, they said the common enemy of humanity is man himself, because we've polluted the earth, blah, blah, blah. But yeah, so they they talk about how that's Game A, and very similar to what I was saying in the Dark Enlightenment is that Game A is going to face these polycrises, and it's doomed to fail, and it's going to, end in some sort of, apocalyptic kind of a state. And you can read this First Values, First Principles of Evolving Perennialism, 42 Propositions on Cosmoerotic Humanism. A bunch of game beers wrote this. You can find it at theofficeofthefuture.com. And this is the manifesto that they use the code name David Temple, but it really is Zach Stein, Kenneth Wilber, and Mark Gaffney. And so, Kenneth Wilber, Theory of Integralism, Mark Gaffney, his Eros Mystery Schools, and Zach Stein, actually, who was involved in this initiation to Game B film, was inducted to the Club of Rome last year in 2024. So the Club of Rome was created, but it's a very long list of people. The initiation of Game B film was a very long list of people, and one of them is Nora Basin, and she is also a Club of Rome member, the daughter of Gregory Basin, Margaret Mead. And so, so they're talking about how it's going to end this Game A. And so we need to move into Game B. But what I find so hypocritical is they say how extractive and exploitative Game B is, but they say that Game A is, but they say that we're going to take the technology from Game A and move it into Game B, which is an omni-win world. It's non-rivalrous. It's just a utopia. It's so wonderful. And the end of the film, they have like a Game B NFT. So they have a token for Game B. So if people want kind of a 20-minute overview, that might be a good place to go to see. But there's also an article, and I think I might have mentioned this in the article that I wrote, but there's an article under Manifest Nirvana written by Andrew Cohen. I had this theory because we've got, the Weinstein brothers, and we have like Jordan Peterson's kind of ancillary to Game B. There's all these intellectual dark web figures. So I kind of had this theory that the intellectual dark web was a influence operation for Game B. And in this article by Andrew Cohen, he doesn't use the word influence operation. That's me. That's a little too heavy-handed. He wouldn't say that. But he does say that it was seeding the ground for the audience acquiescence to the ideas of Game B, which is essentially an influence operation. So very interesting. That's kind of Game B. And now we've got like the B labs, which Jim Rutt supports as the proto Game Bs, the emerging Game Bs. Part of it is these B labs, which are they have ESG metrics, and a lot of there's 6,000 corporations in them already in the B labs, B corporations. So Patagonia is one of them. Ben & Jerry's, who claims that they are not an ice cream company, they're an activism organization. And they just happen to sell ice cream.
Away from that. Crypto-friendly cities. How does this tie into this? And can you explain what is a crypto-friendly city and what is the goal there?
Yeah, so like network states will be crypto-friendly cities, right? You'd need, in a network state, you'll need a digital ID to enter. You'll have a certain currency, which will most likely be crypto, digital form of currency, and things will be tokenized. And so in Game B, they call it the Civium Project. And they say, the way they're couching it is that you're exiting the cities, but you're still entering these digital realms. And he talks about, he used to be really in favor of blockchain for it, but now he's talking about something called Quai, which is another variation. This is Jordan Hall, but Jordan Hall 4 years ago at Prospera, at the Society, the Startup Societies Foundation in Prospera, he gave a presentation on Game B startup societies, network states. And then 4 years later, it was pretty recently, I think it was about 11 months ago, he did a presentation on Game B network states. And this was pretty interesting because he converted to Christianity about a year ago. And he's talking about how we should use liturgy And he doesn't use the term communitarianism, but that's essentially what he was saying. Like, it was not religious liturgy, at least not how I understand it. He's really talking about communitarianism, and communitarianism is third way, right? The UN described it as back in the 1980s. And that's really, and of course, in the U.S., we had Bush talked about compassionate conservatism. This was kind of like an introductory to third way communitarianism in the U.S. But communitarianism is very much how a lot of this will be ushered in. This kind of third way hybrid, and the network states are the culmination kind of across the board, because a SovCorp or a GovCorp is essentially a network state. It's you're exiting the geographical nation state in favor of these networked cloud kind of, and some of them will have physiological domain, like Prospera, for instance. It's in Honduras, Roatan, Honduras, and it is a network state, but there is a physical locale as well, but it's outside the jurisdiction of the nation's laws. So this is built upon the idea of seasteading that Peter Thiel had, which I think is very reminiscent of Terramar, Ghislaine Maxwell. But he had this concept of seasteading. He put $1.7 million into this idea, and it's where you would build these city-states on international waters. So you're outside the bounds of national laws, right? So it's international waters, and they're outside those confines, and it didn't really take off. And so, but Balaji Srinivasan in his book has a section dedicated to seasteading, and he says it was largely the inspiration for this concept of nation state. And I put in my article the quote where he says he doesn't think that seasteading is gone. He says we just need to embrace these network states first, and once those take off, then we can crowd fund for yachts.
Where you can be radically free.
Exactly. Yeah. Radically free with your tokenized, digital ID, and yeah.
It's creepy, like Epstein Island on steroids. But yeah, it was interesting too that Epstein himself, there's an article that came out yesterday about his involvement with Harvard, that he had an office for 20 years provided by Harvard, and that his own technocratic dreams and ambitions, his collection of human DNA for data study and collection and things like that. How does his angle with all this tie in, and what are your thoughts on the whole Epstein thing?
So my thoughts on the Epstein thing are that the whole trafficking pedophilia is actually a smokescreen for the bigger story. And I don't want to undermine that story. That's tragic. I don't support trafficking or, pedophilia rings, obviously. That's terrible. That should be stopped and exposed and all of that. But I think what he was really focusing on, I think that was used as leverage, as blackmail for a lot of this transhuman agenda. And if you look at so much of he funded Valor with Peter Thiel, right? He put in 40 million. I think it's now worth 170 million. It's always named after Tolkien's type of Lord of the Rings kind of terminology. All of these guys really very rooted in fiction. It's very interesting. They take these themes and extrapolate them. But he was tied in with MIT, the Media Labs. He founded Edge Foundation, which was a lot of these, it was kind of like a networking fellowship think tank type of thing with a lot of scientists who are involved in cutting edge type of technology. He was involved with MIT's QuantDot, which is using quantum computing that would lay the groundwork for this type of tokenization that I've been talking about with cryptocurrency. I don't know. We could go on and on, but yeah, Harvard, and of course Charles Lieber was working with Harvard, the Harvard Wuhan Research Lab, and I think that he was part of the 1,000 Talents plan. Right, that he was getting funded by. That was part of what they caught him on, right? It was a tax issue. I think really it was more of an espionage case, and that's the part they don't tell us. But he got a slap on the wrist for tax evasion. He was part. There's obviously all of the intelligence ties too, right? Where he was funding a lot of the technology there. So I don't know. There's so many different angles, but there was recently, it was actually a few days ago, Eric Weinstein, who was talking about how Epstein knew his work when he shouldn't have even had access to it.
I saw.
You saw that, right? And he was saying how he was very kind of cryptic about it, and but essentially he was alluding to Epstein, is not a disgraced financier, that he's really somehow gatekeeping science and or controlling it in some fashion. He said he didn't know, but he thinks that was really, and I agree though. I think his real agenda was involved in this transhuman project, and that was really the story that we keep hearing about, the trafficking, and I think that's really where the focus was and what's not being exposed.
That's a really great angle to also consider, because his start happened at the Dalton School, right? It was,
Yes.
Donald Barr, who gave him a teaching position at the age of 18 as a mathematics teacher.
That's right.
Bill Barr's father.
Bill Barr's father, who wrote the space relations book.
Yeah, about an alien race that sodomized little children on little Earth-like planets, right?
Yeah.
You can't make this stuff up, people. I mean, it is insane. I posted an article about that back in 2017 on Facebook before I came back later. But yeah, it's been out there for a while. But interestingly enough, the fact that even back then, people knew that he would have these parties and always be inviting these young teenage girls, and his propensity for that was well known in those circles. But that he should end up with a teaching job and then go on to meet, people. What's that?
He was a college dropout. Right? Yeah. And I know Dalton. Dalton's like a very prestigious prep school in New York City. Yeah. And then, he would only work there for a few years. And then right after that, he gets this huge, investment to start up a hedge fund, only dealing with like multimillionaires. I mean, who starts out that way? Usually you go through like a 2-year grueling, process where you're working as an investment banker, like getting your training wheel. You don't start off with like leading a hedge fund like that.
Exactly. So there's a lot to it. His meetings with Stephen Hawking and other high-profile people. So.
Edge Foundation. Yep.
Right. And what your article does really well too is it takes all these loose ends and paints a picture that is relatable. You can actually relate to it, because it's wonderful in my mind how you bring the receipts. Good on you there. And this move, I just want to move and keep moving, and then we're going to jump into some of the solution oriented. So. Sure. Yeah. We're an hour and 35 minutes, if I'm right here. Sure. The Theo Bros, adding divine mandate to the techno-authoritarianism. And this is interesting because you start off with Pete Hegseth. That, tell us about and this also is reminiscent of, Jordan Peterson's conversion. Who's the guy who always wears his shirt down with the hair that converted to Christianity a couple years back? I'm sorry, I don't know. He's the English guy that he was sort of a wild guy. I'll think of his name in a second, but he's another notable that converted to Christianity. And you mentioned recently that one of the guys...
Russell Brand, are you thinking?
Russell Brand, yeah, exactly.
Yes, Christ consciousness.
Right.
Yeah.
There's this conversion to Christianity taking place, which is sort of a backward leap psychologically, you could say, but it's not authentic. There's something nefarious about it, obviously, to anybody with half a brain. But tell us about this. Why is this happening? How is it related to the Theo Bros, and what is this divine mandate?
So I think there's a concept. I'm blanking on the guy's name. Totally blanking on his name. But he's got this concept of the three-legged stool. So I will hopefully think of his name. But he's the concept of the three-legged stool. So you need the political, the spiritual, and the economic angle in order for to work. And technocracy never had this. Like it had the, obviously it had this economic angle. It was a reaction to the Great Depression. That's what the whole technocracy movement was centered around, and how they were going to create their abundance, right, through these energy credits, which are now carbon credits, by the way. That was their whole philosophy. And they really weren't interested in politics, and they weren't interested in religion. They were like, there's that's all junk, whatever, garbage. They didn't have any interest at all. But now I think because they want to phoenix the republic, it's really important for them to infiltrate and take over the political arm and take over the spiritual religious arm. And because they're operating through the right-hand path, as I see it, a lot of the Republicans, quote unquote, and the, people on the political right tend to be more religious and traditionalists. They tend to be Christian or, more rooted in a traditional religious kind of framework. So it makes sense that you would use that in order to create this, to round out the three-legged stool. And so we have this notion of like the Christian nationalists, who is a very deceptive, again, label, because it's not people who are patriotic and happen to be Christian, although there is a difference between nationalism and patriotism. I think people conflate the two, and I think that's a mistake, but there is a difference between the two. But, a lot of people think, oh my gosh, like I support my nation and I'm a Christian. That's not what these people are doing. These people are literally talking about implementing a theocracy, which means you would have to supplant the United States Constitution. And some of them have openly said that. They're fine with that. They want biblical law to replace the Constitution. Now, regardless of what you think about the Constitution, regardless of what you think about Christianity. I mean, I think the 10 Commandments are wonderful. By the way, they come from the Old Testament, which a lot of these theoros seem to forget, because a lot of them are very, against the Jews, right? So, but I don't know if they want the 10 Commandments to rule. That's kind of where they
want to return to a monarchy.
They want a monarchy.
Yeah, interesting. Which I
want.
Yeah.
And so you can start to see the synergy. You've got Curtis Yarvin talking about how we should have a CEO dictatorship monarchy. And now we've got these theoros who are saying something very similar, but they're using a divine mandate. So they're implying that it's sacrosanct, right? So they have the justification because there's a divine will to usher this forward. And a lot of them are tied to J.D. Vance, right? Peter Thiel. We've got all of these figures who are kind of intertwined now, and they're talking about using. They're also involved in like all these technologies, right? We've got this Augustus, the Rainmaker, and he's kind of part of this American dynamism movement. And then we've got this. The Gundo Bros, who are working on military technology, but they're also using the front of masculinity and Christianity. So I don't think it's an authentic movement. I don't judge people for, we have a First Amendment. You should be able to believe whatever you want to believe, as long as it does not, it's not treason. You should be able to believe what you want to believe. But they're using this concept of Christian nationalism to subvert the Constitution. And it's very much aligned with the technocratic ends. And that's why they're using it as a cover, because it's a great way to lure people in, much like you brought up Russell Brand. He speaks in Christianese, right? Christ consciousness is straight out of Alice Bailey and Madame Blavatsky, which is not Christianity. They make it very clear they are diametrically opposed to Christianity. They're diametrically opposed to traditional Judaism as well, because it's a separate and monotheistic. And so they reject it outright. But yet they're taking that term, Christ consciousness, and they're talking about, proselytizing Christianity. But it's a very, very deceptive, in my opinion. I think it lures people in using that Christianese language who might be more susceptible to the traditionalist Christian kind of a worldview, but while they're smuggling in this technocratic, totalitarian authoritarianism.
Right. So it's interesting too that, for Judaism and Christianity, and then you have this sort of pairing. It's been termed Islamo-communism.
Mm-hmm.
So we've read about for years, decades, it's been warned that there's, part of the goal of the UN is a one world religion.
Mm-hmm.
How do they plan to fuse the Islamic side into this? Have you uncovered anything on how they're using that to play into this, to this one world religion? Because it seems like Christianity with the Theo Bros and the brands and these sort of pseudo leaders that come in with these terms, and they're obviously moving toward this fusion, if you will. How does the Islamo side of this all play in from your research?
Into which particularly, you think?
World religion. How are they going to get? What is the plan to get Islamic? The Islamo-communist.
Oh, they're all in. So the largest voting bloc of the UN is the Islamic organization. The OIC is actually the largest voting bloc.
Okay.
Yeah. So they're already all tied in with the World Parliament of Religions. They're fusing that syncretic type of religion. There's a lot of infiltration even in Islam. With the Zoroastrian and Sufi. So they already have a lot of that mystical infiltration and infusion. But the UN welcomes the Islamic religion. They reject, because they're theosophical, they reject traditional Christianity, traditional Judaism. They welcome very much the Kabbalistic variations of those. So Q Kabbalah, or C Kabbalah, or the K, which is the Jewish Kabbalah. They're very welcoming of those. A lot of the mystical variants of these religions they welcome, but they reject the traditional monotheistic. They even accept ayahuasca religion in the World Parliament of Religions. So I think the Islamic, there's a really great book that I would encourage. I tell people all the time to check out, the Milner-Fabian Conspiracy. And they talk about how the whole plan for the Islamification of the West, and how they're using, that migration and that infiltration to align with these socialist ends, to create an internationalist economic world order, which is what, they were trying to do back then. That's what they called it. But the Islam and the communist interests have been very aligned for a very, very long time. And really it's to subvert. They want to subvert the United States. But what we're seeing right now is, again, a dialectic, because you've got some of this more authoritarian, autocratic type of the anti-feminist movement, who are very much steering towards Islam, because what would be one of the solutions is like Sharia law. Where they say, okay, well, at least we have traditional roles in this world. They seem to overlook the fact that the women can be raped and no problem. That's to be just perfectly fine. But this is what happens, because you get this dialectic churning. So you've got these poles that push them from one side back and forth. The pendulum swing, as people like to say. So you've got that end of it too. So they're pushing it either from the autocratic kind of perspective, or from the communist, socialist, like the infiltration in all the academic institutions, where they're all championing a pro-Islam. You see that with the protests all over, and that's asymmetric warfare. Those are funded, and we have evidence of that. That's not my speculation.
Sure. It's a lot of slippery slopes, and it's very hard to.
It's complicated. It's not like none of this is one dimensional. And that's why, I really did try to tie this all together. And of course, people are like, well, oh, you think that Teal is the ultimate like architect and puppet master, nobody's above him. Like, that's not what I'm saying at all. I actually don't think that at all. And I've discussed this, I can't tell you for sure that I know who's pulling his strings, but we know he's got ties with the military industrial complex. I mean, Palantir and In-Q-Tel, we know all about that. And now their new deal with Anduril and, OpenAI, the new defense contract. So we've got that piece. We've certainly got the Opus Dei connection, right? With the priest that he met in Stanford. So, I mean, there's all sorts of various ties that I could speculate on. But what I was really focused on is the things we can see. What is the lay of the land that we can look at, because that's what we have personal agency over, right? We can do something about the things we can see. We can't target something that we don't know exists, right? So I really want to take this out of the infotainment kind of realm, as people say, and the speculation. I want to put it in where this is boots on the ground. This is things that we can see, and it's things that we can do something about. And then there's one other component I do want to add, because you had mentioned a little bit earlier about like property rights, and I do want to address that, because I think this is very deceptive and confusing for a lot of people. I'm absolutely in favor of people defending property. Of course, you should defend your property rights. However, property rights are not a bulwark against the technocracy. They are using that actually and I lay this out quite a bit in my article. They use the banner of libertarianism to, lure people. This whole individual freedom, and that I am the self-govern, right? This kind of mindset, they're using that to entice people. And it's very deceptive, because that's actually how they're going to steer people into technocracy. When you start looking at what they're doing, everything is done through ownership, right? They have these DAO, decentralized autonomous organizations that are run by smart contracts. This is ownership, right? So you sign into that, and now on these various platforms, they privatize everything, right? This is what all of them are talking about. The network states are private. The Game B, Civium state projects, they're all privatized. The proto Game Bs, the technologies they're developing, of course, the GovCorps and SovCorps, this is all private. And we see this in real time with Peter Thiel taking things like Prospera, which is completely outside the confines of national laws. It's all privatized. And through this, they can seize complete control and implement the tokenization. And so we need to start thinking about liberty as being, our being. It's our self. It's intrinsic in our, in our being, and it's embedded and rooted in natural law. And sovereignty is in the people. It's not in the coding. It's not in the smart contract. So I just want to make that distinction, because I think a lot of people are thinking about the exclusion, which is the law of exclusion, which is the property rights, right? If I can exclude it, then I have ownership. And that's going to be a defense against tyranny. Now, that might be a defense in the, communism. But in technocracy, it actually advances technocracy, and this is part of the whole concept of technoplastic beings, right? Because once they use this synthetic biology, what's to say that they don't have ownership of it? Right now, anything you can patent, you can own. So
that's very interesting, because it's an angle that a lot of people miss. But how does the mRNA, the nanotechnology that was in the vaccines, they own that stuff. So when it's injected into your body, how does that play a part in their ownership? Is it ownership by extension at that point? These are questions I guess we have to ask, because
based on the way the law works currently, I think it has to be a certain percentage of ownership. I think it might be 20%, of change, right? To acquire ownership. I don't know where they'll go with that, and I don't know if they can prove one way or the other. Like right now, a lot of that is speculation in terms of what was even in the shots and how that all works. But do I think that that's where they're going and their vision? Yes. this is the whole field of synthetic biology, the internet of nanobio things, the internet of everything, the internet of wearable. That is where everything is going, the technoplastic being, where we will be owned, right? If we don't have a self-ownership, if it's not intrinsic in our being, an inalienable right. That's what our liberty is, an inalienable right from our Creator. That's what's codified in the Declaration of Independence, right? That we were endowed with these inalienable rights from our Creator, the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And if we don't frame it that way, if it's about property, which is an extension, and part of property is the fruits of our labor, right? That's part of property. But if it's about this microphone that I own, then that can all be usurped. That's not, it can be recognized. Exactly. Chain.
The very word blockchain, you're chained to a block of concrete, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the crypto is death, crypt, right?
Yeah.
That's very interesting because even the word self is has a double meaning. When someone says I own myself, I prefer to say I am myself.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, because even the double play here is that ownership of the self. What about the tokenization? How dangerous can that be?
Sure.
But we need to talk about the solutions, because I love the article. We could go on for hours discussing it. I've sort of perused through it, but the Phoenix moment is on the doorstep, as they say, and your article points out. You go into the mythology of it very well, and it certainly does seem to have some relevance. So you had mentioned, cognitive sovereignty. What a great term. So just in your opinion, Courtney, let us know, the audience, what is the solution to this in your eyes? What is going to be the thing that really deters the techno state at the end of the day, and the culmination of this beast system, if you will?
Techno-feudalism, yes, and the beast system, exactly. I think really it is about cognitive sovereignty, and I kind of differentiate cognitive freedom, which builds, cognitive liberty. The cognitive liberty is what we need to defend now, cognitive freedom for the future, and ultimately it is about cognitive sovereignty. And it's something that it seems so simple, and it doesn't seem like much, but I really think that is the bulwark, because so much of this is about co-opting. They want us part of the collective intelligence. They want us to be inhabiting the noosphere. There was a TED Talk actually over a decade ago where they talk about implanting chips, and how when they implant the chips, right now, the way they explain is that right now, we could have empathy for somebody. Like they might share a story, we might feel for them. They could share a dream they had, and we could kind of relate to it. But with these chips, we would actually be able to have the same experience. So we would have the shared experience. And they're talking about essentially having that across the world. Everybody would be a part of the same experience. Now, I don't know about you, but I kind of want to retain my free will.
Yeah.
I'd love to be able to, relate to your experiences and hear about them. And, and if I can, help you in any way, I'm all for that. And there are just some shared underlying kind of universals, of course, being human, that we will all relate to. But there's something really beautiful about our uniqueness and about our cognitive liberty and our cognitive faculties, where we can create things that are completely unique to you or to me. And then we could work together, and then together we can build beautiful things. So I think that is incredibly important, and that is really the bulwark. And part of that is, none of us are impervious to programming and conditioning. I mean, there's some element where we will always, be, subject to that. However, there are things we can do to fortify our cognitive sovereignty. We can certainly be aware of the types of programming. We can limit certain conditioning and certain propaganda. And I think that is actually really huge. It's a very, very powerful, because a lot of this, like when I describe the left and the right hand path, obviously the dark enlightenment is talking about just, outright creating techno-feudalism, just seizing the republic altogether, phoenixing it and implementing the CEO dictator and whatever the CEO says, that's what goes. And of course they say, oh, it's voluntary. If you don't like that CEO, you can move to another one. Good luck exiting once there's a recursive smart contract in place. But I don't know how that's going to work out for you, but all right, you'll probably be able to voluntarily enter, but I don't know. Exiting. But then in the game B, it's a much more like soft power, soft influence. It's more about like, conditioning you with your social ethic. We should take care of the planet. We should care about each other. We should not compete. All of these things. Selfishness is bad, right? That's what Barbara Marx Hubbard said. The selfish just shouldn't evolve. And it's much more of that kind of mindset. But either way, ultimately they're talking about eradicating the individual. That is what they're talking about, and making us these global citizens as a cog in this technocratic machine. And that really doesn't serve. It's not serving any of us. There may be the feudal lords at the top who are programming this, that maybe it'll serve them. But I don't see how this serves humanity at all. So really protecting your cognitive sovereignty, I think, is a really good start. I think, inculcating that in your children, if you're parents, teaching them critical thinking, to not question everything in a critical theory kind of sense, or in a apostatic kind of, where you just negate everything. That's not what I'm encouraging. But, to really investigate, to really question, to not take things as face value, to develop their own identity so that they have a sense of what are their values, what matters to them, what do they prioritize, not just what they've been fed, to come up with their own thoughts and ideas. And a lot of that comes from reading, from thinking, from real discussions, discourse, not just social media kind of interaction. So I think that's a huge starting place. And then I think everybody can take, people always want like the smoking gun solution. And as I said, the problem is way more complex than people want to acknowledge. So obviously the solution is not going to be like a one and done kind of an answer. But I do think there are things we can do. And in America, I think pushing back against some of this crypto stuff that's coming through, especially at the national scale, because that is not, it's going to look just like the CBDCs, and that is control surveillance program money. So I think we should push back on that. That's something we can do. Definitely at the local level, we can work through our states, our local counties, push back against some of the technocratic initiatives, like some of the stuff they were doing with the farming. But everybody has their unique strengths, gifts, and talents, I believe, and they have their passions too. And I think that's what people should let be their guide. So somebody, maybe they're a mom and homeschooling is something they're really passionate about, get involved in that. Help out your neighbors with their homeschooling, and teach the kids cognitive sovereignty and give them the foundational tools to build that. Maybe you're a farmer and you're really passionate about that, and you want to push back against some of this, chipping the cows. Right? Like, some of what they're doing, the climate smart commodity projects, where they're monitoring all the greenhouse gas emissions so they can meet their ESG requirements. What's going on is insane. So maybe you're passionate about that, push back there, and also produce there, right? Produce the truly regenerative to whatever extent you're able to, right? Whatever your resources allow. I'm just trying to give certain examples, but this kind of people who might not know that there's something called technocracy, because there are people who don't know what that is or where it comes from, or that, it was a movement in the 1930s that, Elon Musk's grandfather was the head of it in Canada from 1936 to 1941. Maybe share some of that information, because that might help people who are not aware to be able to do something, and maybe they'll become great soldiers in the fight. So I think the answers, the solutions are going to look different for different people, but cognitive sovereignty is really, I think, the cornerstone.
Well, that's wonderfully said. Good summation. And I think too, just to add, we and touching on, highlighting on your points, we need to have a healthy and strong psychology.
Mm-hmm.
We don't need to be afraid to be the outsider from time to time, because generally the outsider is the only one who can see in, right? Yeah. So it helps to have your own unique perspectives, and with that comes a little bit of fear, but courage is the thing that leads to bravery. And once you have bravery, you don't need the courage anymore. I guess they're synonymous in a way, but you can make an effort. You can realize certain things, arrest the patterns in your life that are detrimental to you and move beyond those, create new ones that fortify your family, the strength of your own individuality, your cognitive sovereignty. Read good authors, watch the great epic high art of good movies that, embody the outsider principle, and just, be the best as in terms of authenticity and originality that you can be as a human being. And, every little step we take, though it may be apart, it is sort of together, because this is going to take a group effort, a collective effort, if you will, of individuals who realize that sovereign nature given by God to defeat this tyranny of technocracy, which is, on the verge of becoming real. I have one final question for you, and I'd just like to, after that, have you share your sites and what you're going to be doing in the future for our listeners. How does Trump play into all of this? What is your personal view on Trump? Has he sold his soul? Has he gone too far? Is he unredeemable? Or where does he lie on Courtney's radar screen?
So I think there are people, because people just love binaries, nuance tends to be very elusive for many. So that's part of why dialectics are so effective. A lot of people either put him in one or two camps. He's either like the savior and he is going to solve all of our problems. The white hats have it. And, just trust Trump. He was anointed by God to save us all, and which sounds a little silly to me. But then you've got the people on the other side who think he's like the Antichrist and he's the demon. And, he's going to be responsible for the complete demise of the world and all the problems. And I think that's a little silly too. I think you're giving the guy way too much credit. First of all, as of today, in 2025, we are not a dictatorship. It is not a monarchy. He is not a king. He does not actually have that much power. Do I think he's like inherently a bad guy? I personally don't, but I don't know the guy. I think he loves America. I think he loves it, and he thinks he's thinking about his family. And I think he's also, that whole mice to rascals framework. I think he's like falls right into it. I mean, I think he's got a really big ego. I think he really likes his money. He'd like his family and himself to continue to enjoy his money. I think he wants to be involved in some sort of legacy of America because he's got a big ego. And so I think they're able to prey on that. And this is kind of how things work. He's a deal maker. He's really not a politician. He's a businessman and he's a deal maker. And I think part of politics and how it works is you make these deals. And for him, he wants his deals. He wants his deals to go through. And I don't think he sees the long range of a lot of what is being played and how he's being utilized. And I do think he's being utilized. And I think part of how they utilize him is this, appeal to his ego, appeal to, the things he wants to get accomplished and his legacy and his, what he wants his name to represent. So I think they make these deals with him. And I just don't, he may have Bitcoin and make a lot of money on it. And he may understand some of the market ramifications of it, but I don't think he really understands what technocracy is, what the ramifications of tokenization is. That's never been his world. He's an older guy. A lot of guys his age don't even have I don't think he actually even has a smartphone. Though I just don't think that's his world. I don't think he's focused on it. And I don't think he really fully understands the ramifications of some of these things like the Stable Act, the Clarity Act, the Genius Act, and what that could mean and what it's laying the ground for down the road. I don't don't personally think he has the foresight for that. He's admitted he's not a big reader. He doesn't like to read. So I think a lot of things get thrown in front of him. They're told, like, here's the deal. You do this, we do this. You scratch my back, we scratch yours, and he signed the contracts, he signed the bills, whatever it is. And I think that's kind of how the game works. So unfortunately, I think he's playing right into the hands of the technocrats. And I think what they really would like is nothing more than to get him out of the way. They've used him.
And put
Vance in, because Vance is their technocrat. Vance is their guy. He's been groomed for that role.
Here, a lot of us have, a warning, you could say, that's in the background of our minds that, the Teal connection and such. But
yeah, so that's my thought. I mean, I do think in like whatever vision of America he has, I think he's got a very romanticized and pro-Americana. And I think he'd like to see that preserved, but I think he has no idea what this technocracy will look like and how it will completely subvert America.
I think probably his worst trait is his advisors, who's advising him. So, well, thank you so much. Why don't you share with the audience, what is Courtney up to? I'm going to put all your links. I've copied them all be underneath in the more info section. What's coming up for you? Houston said you had 3 books in the works, which is amazing. And just any big events, things like that coming up, and just where can people find you?
Yeah. So, yes, I do have 3 books I'm in the midst of. One of them is co-authoring surrounding this topic. So it's been a huge honor to have been asked to collaborate on that project. So that one will probably be very soon. The algorithmic oracle one, that's an article right now. I'm adding a little bit to it, although it's quite long already, and I'm going to format that so that's available in book form. People can purchase, and of course the Hegel dialectic and Gnostic Jacob's ladder. I'm working on that as well. So stay tuned for that. Definitely check out my Substack, because that's where I put a lot of these articles out, and it's also where all of my podcasts go. Early access, and you get them ad free. So I know people don't always love the ads, and so if they want that option, they can, for the price of a very expensive coffee once a month, they can support my work, which does go a long way, and they can get ad free early access to my podcast. I'll probably be starting to do some live streams on Substack as well for my paid subscribers. But you can become a free subscriber there too, and you'll get a lot of material because I put a lot out free also. And so just my podcast, and you can find me at CourtneyTurner.com. I spell my name like Courtenay, so it's CourtenayTurner.com, and that will give you leads to whatever your favorite podcast platform is, whether it's audio, video. You'll find all of that there. And all the ways you can support my work. And I try to keep people posted when I do events, although right now I'm focused kind of on the writing, the podcast. I'll be starting up again with interviews, and we took a little pause from Dangerous Danes, but that'll be starting up again in September. So is there anything else? I think those are it for now.
Well, that's wonderful. Thank you so much. And for the audience, I'm going to leave out with a video of you doing some aerial acrobatics. So not only is Courtney quite versed in the technocracy and all the details, she brings the receipts. Wonderful article again. Implore everybody, get a look at it, take a read of it. And she's got quite a lot of work out there. So there's plenty more after that if you find it interesting, which I absolutely did. And on top of it all, aerial acrobatics. So guys, do the out video, and be sure to visit the links below. And I thank again the audience, my Substack audience, subscribers, and everybody out there. Stay cognitive, stay sovereign. Thank you so much. Thank you, Courtney.
Thank you. Thank you so much.